Welcome to the Solar Energy Development in New Brunswick Roundtable webinar, organized by MJM Solar Solutions, hosted by the Coalition for Responsible Energy Development in New Brunswick, held on July 31st, 2020, with Mark McCann, Chris Williamson, Greg Macpherson, Andrew Harvey, Jenica Atwin, Pascal Giasson, and Dennis Atchison.
So my name is Susan O'Donnell. I'm with the Coalition for Responsible Energy Development in New Brunswick, and we're very pleased to host this meeting that was organized by MJM Solar. I am pleased now to introduce you to the moderator for today's panel, who's Dennis Atchison. So Dennis, over to you.
Thanks very much. Thanks everyone for joining. We're going to introduce the panel, and panel, when I read your name and do your bio, could you just do a very quick hello, and we can watch the face and name recognition kind of go down, okay? So we're lucky enough to have Jenica Atwin, MP for Fredericton.
Hello.
There she is. We have Andrew Harvey, our MLA from
Carleton-Victoria.
There we go, and Andrew's on the phone. Thank you. Pascal Giasson, Senior Sustainable Energy Advisor, Natural Resources and Development.
Hi.
There's Pascal. Greg Macpherson, Senior Financial Advisor at Manulife Securities Incorporated.
Oh.
Hi. And we have Mark McCann of MJM Solar, and he's up in Bathurst today.
Hi, everyone.
There's Mark. And Chris Williamson of Solar Installers Canada has trained over 1,000 solar installers. Chris, say hi.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me here.
Great. And thanks to all the audience for joining and all those on the phone. I thought to frame this up at the start because we're going to go into a conversation about solar energy, which gets into how do we create a large-scale change. And when you get into talking about change, 1,000 other side discussions come up. And today we have to stay focused on the merits and benefits of solar energy. So I thought, let's take a quote from F. Buckminster Fuller as our intro. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the old model obsolete. And that's kind of the cusp of where we are right now. So let's get started with the whole notion of a solar rebate. Can one of you jump into the notion of how that can trigger an economic shift, maybe a cultural shift in a province and a community?
So I think Chris Williamson and I were talking about that last night, and with his training, he does talk about that too. So I'm going to hand that over to Chris if you would like to handle that.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak about incentivization. Incentivization is one of the really important parts, I think, of curating and incubating new technology. And that's really what it's designed for. There's a lot of misconception out in the West, potentially. I mean, I'm from Calgary, so we have some different perceptions here. But one of the perceptions is that incentivization is just a way to transfer public sector funds over to whatever it is that the government of the time would like. And that's really not the case. What we're doing with incentivization is allowing the opportunity for appropriate channels to be created for a new technology while incubating that process. So, through New Brunswick, it might be challenging to acquire solar technology today because the distribution companies don't have legs in the province. So incentivization will allow for those developments through creating this incubator, as I had stated, for that time frame. So when we incentivize something, it should be done for a short period of time. It brings in the opportunity for the risk to be held by the province and the individual on the new technology. It demonstrates the value. And then over time, good incentivization should fall off. So this should not be forever that incentives exist. I believe it's a short period of time in order to give the technology its own wings to stand
on. Others want to add to that?
I think that's very well said.
Okay. This whole notion of incentivizing something, has it worked in other industries? Do we have examples, and then how could that apply to solar in New Brunswick or solar across Canada?
Actually, a lot of the industries that we currently have are already incentivized. Through the West, we have a lot of oil and gas sector incentivization that exists. Mining is often incentivized, and we can see it through different areas. It's not always just end user incentivization, but oftentimes this is done further in the background where we're incentivizing corporations to employ personnel, so they're getting favorable rates associated with contributions for the people. We have things that support the actual mining process, for example. So they will get land lease rebates, different forms of incentives that exist prior to that. It's not all end user incentivization.
I can say like a really close parallel to solar is electric vehicles, where we can see where an incentive has had a huge shift in the uptake of that technology. It's very similar to new technology. The purchase price of an electric vehicle is about $10,000 more than a conventional vehicle, and where there has been incentives not only in North America but across the world to reduce that price disparity. You see the uptake of electric vehicles, sort of exponential growth, really. So people want these things, but the cost difference is what's preventing them from jumping in onto the new technology and reducing their carbon footprint. I think it's very similar to issue with solar, and we're just not there yet, where it's economically feasible for the regular citizen to invest in solar to offset his costs. Electric vehicles, if you get rid of that price disparity, well, you're reducing the amount of carbon you're contributing, assuming you're charging with clean energy, but also you're saving in New Brunswick about $2,000 a year. So the financial incentive is there, the environmental incentive is there, the price disparity is gone, and so the incentives work. Unfortunately, we don't have a purchase incentive in New Brunswick for electric vehicles, but we do have the federal one, which has definitely shifted the adoption of EVs in New Brunswick since the federal incentive has been in place.
Are there?
I just wanted to add, just from an education standpoint, in that when I think about incentivizing and just kind of recruiting even the next generation of potential buyers or engineers to work on on solar energy.
Mm-hmm.
And as an educator, always having to prepare my my grade 12 students to move into post-secondary and what kind of grants or scholarships or opportunities were available, and it's always oil and gas. And so I think there's it needs to kind of bring it down to that level as well, as to recruit, incentivize, get youth excited about this, because I'm sure there's lots of interest, and we've seen a lot of that in having conversations with youth, post-secondary students as well. And it's just there's a gap there, I think, in actually getting them the tools that they need to really kind of jump in and get involved.
Does this get applied at the household level, the community level, provincial level, federal level? Are there examples where there's the first breakthrough or the first concrete, for instance? Is there an area that's best to go to first? Like, is it better to focus on industrial incentives to convert to solar? Is it better to focus on community incentives to convert to solar? Can you guys play in that space a bit?
Yeah, I think it would be a good idea to develop inside communities, and the reason why is because with most of the MB power grid, it's a centralized generation, which means the power that is being generated is off-site. So there's transmission and there's distribution, there's transformers and lots of apparatus that are out on the line. So when you have so much power going through a line, there's certain losses that exist there. So start to finish, you're typically utilities about 40% efficient. So when you put some solar on top of a roof, that eliminates some of the power loss that's experienced by the utility, and they can see savings on the utility side. The customer is going to see savings with their power bill. So having it installed, distributed energy resources would be the way to go.
I'd agree with that. A lot of the projects that I've worked on have been international, and what often gets done is it's a redirection of funding from grid upgrade infrastructure allocation in order to implement these programs to incentivize solar. Because when we start developing point of use production, we decentralize that production, as Mark was speaking about, and we remove a lot of the pressures from the distribution lines. So if one has to invest $500 million in upgrades for distribution lines, and we choose to in turn invest in incentivize localized production on small scale commercial and residential rooftops, then we can actually save a boatload of money. And what a lot of provinces have found is that if they take their funds that they were planning on investing in the distribution lines and allow people to support solar and renewable technologies on the point of consumption, that they can actually double down on the investment. You take $500 million of investment and throw it towards incentivization, where it's a co-pay system, and you actually get double that in total investment because the homeowners are participating and paying in the upgrade as well as the province. So it's a good investment when done through the residential and small scale commercial. And I believe personally that that's where the most power for renewable energy technology exists. It's not these large scale, 30 megawatt fields in a farm. It's actually on top of the roofs, the gas stations, the co-op grocery stores, and the homes where we see the difference.
Let's not forget that it's the right thing to do too. I mean, you're probably thinking, who invited this capitalist on the call anyways, but this isn't what I was prepared to talk about. But I had an experience, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago. I was in Shoppers Drug Mart. I was buying grocery bags, and I'm an analyst. I look at the prices, and there was one that was more environmentally friendly, and then there was one that was 10% or 10 cents cheaper. And there was a thought that went through my head: do I buy the cheaper one or the environmentally friendly one? And the difference was only 10 cents. But and I think incentives are and we're talking about solar panels, not garbage bags, but the point is that incentives can just tip the scales in favor so that society can make the right decisions. And it can even be revenue neutral. So you could, for instance, tax gas guzzling cars and give an incentive to electric vehicles. Or with solar panel, you could maybe take some oil and gas incentives away and give them to environmentally friendly. And so too many people crunch the numbers. I'm a financial advisor, I can understand that. But let's not forget that maybe the right decision to do, like government has a role in maybe incentivizing the right things to do. And anyways, that's my personal belief.
Greg, to follow up on yours a little bit, when you did the 10 cents difference in environmentally friendly or a little bit cheaper, do you find that we're almost ready for circular thinking? Because when you said that, I thought, yeah, but if you full cycle that product in its entire life cycle from when it was created to when it makes it into recycling or wherever it goes, it seems like a lot of incentivization strategies are kind of linear in their thought. We put the money in here, we shift the tables this way, and we have this outcome. But more and more over the past 20 years, there's an awareness of the overall impact of that kind of a decision. So when you talk about the right thing to do, does it also tie to a different way of thinking?
Well, I hate to be like this, but I'm a little bit of a skeptic or cynical, I hear, because anecdotally, I wish I had actual numbers, but anecdotally, when I'm talking to people, I have solar panels on my building and on my home, and the first question they ask is, how much did it cost? What's the payback? And I have answers for that, but I guess the point is that if I feel like if it's just $1 more expensive to do solar, people won't do it. They really need to know that it's cheaper or a good investment, and I believe it is. But the point is that it's a little bit cynical of me, but I just feel that society will not do the right thing if it costs a bit more.
Yeah, no, and it's not cynical. And this is an important point to bring up because that's one of the myths, or that's one of the perceptions. And the shift is probably going to be an emotional shift as much as it is merits of the decision kind of shift. And we have to walk right into that space. So thank you for doing that. Now, do any of you have a way to respond or to flesh out?
Sorry, I'm going to speak a lot because I've got a lot to say. I've been working in this industry for a long period of time. And that's left me with a lot of different moments, I guess. And one of the moments in this industry is when we started talking about cost and effect. And one thing to keep in mind is that this all starts, I believe, with education for the masses. We need the large groups of people to understand the technology better, and we need to be able to get rid of a lot of the myths that are being tossed around about this industry, because most of it is completely inaccurate. And once we start doing that, then we can start talking about people making the right decision. But I don't know how many people truly understand that it is the right decision today. I can't tell when I look to the forums that exist on social media as to whether these people are serious when they post some of the beliefs they have, or whether they're just doing it to be antagonistic. So I think that the educational aspect is very important. let's get onto a base standard of understanding of what this technology does. Let's accept its limitations and its benefits, and then we can start discussing how to integrate.
Yep, but that's such a key point, though. At the household level, they're going to ask those simple and very direct questions, and if there's to be a conversion, there's got to be answers for that. This might go on for 10 years, though. There's a repetition necessary as it trickles through, which then gets into two thoughts. Jenica, I'd like you to speak to a little bit. How could an incentivization program roll out nationally? Because one of the questions from Dave Wagner was, I'd like to see incentives available in all provinces. Can a federal government do that, or is that the jurisdiction of different provincial governments, or do they need to partner together to show that leadership?
I think, well, we absolutely need to partner together because we need to have our provinces on board, and that's been a bit of an issue for other sectors and other issues as well. And we know there's a slight reluctance in our corner of the world, and so we're working to we're working against that. And I think it is about information and education. And I think that's a big a key piece of that, because there is so much misinformation around. And so I think if people are given the correct numbers, the accurate information, and I love that you included, Chris, limitations as well. We need to be really honest and open with people about what are the benefits and what are the limitations and restrictions that exist. And it's interesting, since Planet of the Humans came out, I don't know how many times throughout social media that if we're ever promoting renewable energy or, alternative thinking, that someone is really quick to share the link to Planet of the Humans, and they believe that I should rethink everything that I've ever kind of believed in my entire life because of Michael Moore's documentary. So, that exists. So you're right. I'm not sure if we're quite there yet with everyone who understands just, how critical these next steps are, and that how now available this type of technology is, and much more affordable. Although I do see a really great question here from John Rice, and I would love to have someone's expertise in answering that. So perhaps we could move into that one as well.
Yep. To segue from that, Mark, I want to include you a little bit. You have an example, I think, of conversion of so many homes in New Brunswick in a certain window of time, and how much employment that would create, and what the overall benefit would be. Do you remember that piece, and can you wander into that?
When we were looking at the energy fuel mixture for the province, there was a certain amount of capacity that could be installed with solar. So that capacity to be installed with solar would generate 729 jobs over the next 10 years, with about an average pay of $55,000 a year for those jobs. And that's just for 20% of the, that would be if 20% of New Brunswick's population were to buy the average costing system for solar.
I see that there's a couple questions there about cost and payback and whatnot, which is something I'm prepared to talk about. So there's many factors that go into that, and there's folks on the call here that would be more of an expert on that part. But just to give you an example, let's say a $20,000 solar energy system might save you roughly $1,000. There's many factors that can vary there, but it might save you, let's say, $1,000 a year on energy costs, and that's a 5% payback. That assumes that the panels keep their value more or less, but just roughly speaking, it's a 5% payback. If you walk into the bank right now, you can't get a 1% GIC, and a 10-year government bond in the US is 0.5%. So to get a 5% return on your $20,000 investment, and that $1,000 is tax-free. So if you were in, let's say, a 50% tax bracket, which is a high bracket, but if you're in a 50% tax bracket, you'd need a GIC or bond or something that paid you 10% to give you that rate of return. So there are other factors there involved, but it's not it's maybe not the greatest investment, but it's not a bad use of the money. And I have other things to say about that, but that's my point for now.
Good. Anyone else want to add to that? Maybe following on the money theme a little bit, and if this can stir you guys up a little bit, we have Herb Emery as a regular column in the local newspaper. He's an economist up at University of New Brunswick. Recently, he did a piece called "Why Do We Keep Driving Prosperity Away?" And he's looking pretty much from the story he writes, from the industrial base and the traditional model base, the stuff we've done in New Brunswick for 50 years. Investments in shale gas and in oil and in pipelines and second oil refineries. And he and David Campbell, who's also an economist, identified that 40 billion in investment has left the province. And he explains it this way at the end of it, because once projects are driven away, the province seems to move on quickly. So he's lamenting the loss of what he calls prosperity. And he says, I'm comfortable declaring the anti-growers as the victors. Politically, it's been easier to drive away 40 billion in investment than to seek the social license and political support needed to allow the investment and growth to happen. We've been sort of speaking to that a little bit because it gets on the cusp of change. How do you change a culture of investment to one from guaranteed returns to one of we're not sure the returns or the returns are only this big at this point in time? Am I close to a question? Does that kind of make sense? Because there's a culture shift that needs to happen from the investment community. Anyone?
I think the change is going to be similar to what the heat pump industry has seen with when they brought out a few of the incentives for like a mini split heat pump. You know, when they initially started around here, a lot of people were saying, you know, that's quite a bit of money. A baseboard heater is much cheaper. I can go out and buy one for $100. Why are these, you know, $3,000 or $4,000 for these units? So after people get solar or they get heat pumps, then they talk to other people about their solar system or their heat pump. So they're quite happy with it. And I mean, solar is going to save you money. A heat pump is going to save you money. So once people start realizing the actual savings from these and the benefit that they give them, then that's sort of passed on. You know, it's slowly, but it's one to one person and another person gets it. And then after a while, it just snowballs and everybody sees it.
Anyone else want to?
Yeah, I'd like to toss in there too. Another way to get around this too is through creative financing options. A lot of financial institutions are starting to get on board with these types of systems. And what we look at is we see an average return on investment that exists for a PV array, solar system. It lives around, you know, the 10 to 12 year mark in most parts of the country. When we take this and we couple it with the amortization of a mortgage of maybe 20 to 25 years, we start seeing that monthly we have a net positive benefit to our checkbook. You know, if we were looking at something that takes 10 to 12 years to pay off and I'm paying for it over 20 years, then we can oftentimes see that I've got more money in my pocket at the end of each month. The products themselves are mostly warranted for 25 years when we're making the appropriate choices for an installer, so inverters and modules themselves. So it is reasonable to believe that a lot of financiers will take on this position to cover the cost associated with the install and drag that out over further distances. There's also a lot of programs that could exist that we can bring into different parts of the country. The PACE program is one of them, which allows us to take the cost investment associated with the array and start putting it onto our tax roll, which will travel to new buyers. I saw that one individual in the comments was talking about what's the benefit if they sell their home prior to the payoff point. So creative financing options make a big world of difference, because if you can tell someone that they either have the option to pay their power bill or they have the option to pay their loan and start getting to a similar spot when we can start achieving an annual net zero for our production, then we can start expecting that people will make those choices as well.
Okay, just a second. Andrew, were you trying to add something?
Yeah, well, I can add a couple things. Thank you, and sorry about that. I can't be on Zoom. But on the PACE program, I really believe in that. Obviously, I think it's something that you can tie your expenditures or tie your investment in solar to your value of your home, and there's some role for government to manage that in the sense of property tax, and that it's somewhat, there's a protection there, obviously, for the government to advance some money and to get the job done. Because what I find, I put solar on my house 3 years ago. Of course, I wasn't eligible for any programs, and there wasn't any programs in New Brunswick If there was, I wouldn't be eligible anyways, an MLA, but I did it for the long term, right? And we have a 5,000 watt system, but with the ability to double that shortly. So, but I looked at the long term investment and people, but the cost, I had the means to pay it, but the average New Brunswicker does not have that money to invest in their home. If they have a $100,000 home, $150,000 home, they won't have the money to invest up front. So there has to be a means through Efficiency New Brunswick or through the government, through Efficiency New Brunswick, to have certain programs that will basically tie that investment to that property. And so I'm very excited about that. I think that's something that we should be doing as a government in New Brunswick. And there's other things that we should be doing. There's references there to other incentives in terms of mini splits and electrical vehicles and that sort of thing. But so no, I think the PACE program is something I've looked at, and I think it's bang on. So just wanted to add that.
Great, thank you. Greg, in my prep notes for this, I was told that solar makes sense as an investment for retirees. Do you want to play with that a bit?
Yeah, it's kind of I've never heard this anywhere else, but obviously a good part of my job is retirement planning. And if you have solar panels and that's going to lower your expenses for many, many years and decades. Therefore, your retirement expenses are lower. Therefore, you don't need as much retirement income. So you don't need to take as much money out of an RSP, or you don't need as much pension income or income from other sources. And if your income in retirement is lower, not only are you in perhaps a lower bracket and you save yourself some money and some taxes, but you potentially are more likely to qualify for the supplement, guaranteed income supplement, or you are less likely to get old age security clawback. Or if you needed assisted living care, the government looks at your income to see if you can afford to pay it. And if you can keep your retirement income lower, it entitles you to more things and keeps you in a lower bracket. And anyway, so again, the idea of putting, and Andrew makes a good point that not everyone has $20,000 just sitting around. But if you think of it as a retirement investment, it's I mean, I have other investments that I like as well, but it's a perfectly legitimate retirement investment, except instead of generating income necessarily, you could think of it as lowering your retirement expenses. And again, if you are in if it saves you $1,000 a year, and you are in, to make my math simple, let's say you're in a 50% tax bracket, you actually need $2,000 of maybe RSP income to pay the $1,000 of power. And so to save yourself $1,000 of power each year, you might have, I know these numbers aren't perfect, but $20,000 investment. And anyways, it's a perfectly legitimate retirement strategy.
Great.
Add one more thing to that concept too. I'd like to point out that all of our return on investment calculations, for the most part, are done with the concept of today's cost of power included, and how long it takes to pay off that bill. I'm not sure how many people believe that the cost of energy is going to stay the same over the lifespan of their PV array, but it is going to go up. Energy is incentivized all across the board. We're starting to see the fallout of incentivization through the energy sector, and this is happening big time right now in Manitoba. So they're starting to get notices about increases associated with power costs moving up quite heavily. And so we should always consider the fact that our numbers are based on today's numbers, and good people providing projections will not be able to factor in what they anticipate the cost of electricity will be. However, internationally, the cost of electricity hovers almost at 30 cents a kilowatt hour when we include everything in. The reason we get to see lower rates is because of the incentivization process across the board for the energy sector, from the mining or extraction of the stuff that is turned into the electricity, all the way to the workers and the op costs associated with them through provincial and federal incentivization. So remove that, we'll see the true cost of energy. And then when we see the true cost of energy, we might not like it so much, and solar is going to sound a lot better.
Pascal's shaking his head. It's good.
Yeah.
Before we've gone a half hour on
Yeah.
finances, and there's a question here I'd like to get to because it gets into the application now and actually getting on with doing it. It's from Gordon Carpenter in St. John. I'm considering a subdivision consisting of 8 lots with a southern aspect in the Westfield area. Can you talk about bank response to mortgage support to off-grid building? Who would speak to that?
I think there's a couple of rules with bank loans, and that might he's probably already knows the answer there. So banks, they often want to have connection to the utility and a road in, and the connection to the utility with an off-grid place might not be able to be financed right now. I'm sure that you might be able to find someone that could, but often we see that's the case where, I mean, we're working on an off-grid job right now. It's not financed, and it just, if you don't have the means like Andrew was talking about, and you do want to live off-grid, then you have to go another avenue, or build much smaller, or build it over time, or a self-build. So the banks still have not caught up with it. All the projects that we do, they're all engineered, they're all designed similar to the electric power grid. It was designed and engineered. So there's really not much difference in between the two systems in terms of how they're going to function when they're designed properly. So sometimes the bank believes that there's a risk because it's an off-grid home, and they fear that the exposure that they might have on it, that nobody will buy it. But that's changing quite quickly. But the banks, they still haven't caught up with it.
Okay, and there's a footnote here from Luke Randall saying, Mr. Credit Union offers loans at prime for solar installs. Just a footnote to what you were saying.
I just wanted to add that, we're talking a lot about individuals taking on, what they think is potentially a risk, or, talking about their personal finances and what that might look like and how difficult it is for us as individuals, especially New Brunswickers. And I'm so interested in the idea of community solar projects, because I just think it has so much potential, and we're all, people are kind of sharing that risk and what that might look like. And I think it can make more sense financially. So I know I'd love to hear from some of our experts on that as well. But just as an example, which is kind of it can't work everywhere because it's a First Nation setting. So our Mukta First Nation has a solar install that they've had now for, I think it's been about 4 years. And so they were able to make that decision on behalf of their membership. And they certainly did consultations and had people, kind of offer whether or not they wanted their house to be included or not. But largely they made this decision for the mutual benefit of everyone in that community. So all of their businesses and any home that was in kind of in a good range to receive the amount of solar energy required. So they are looking at, cost savings over a 5 to 10 year period, because, for example, they pay their elders have their power paid. So it was a major savings for them. So it totally made sense in this kind of community approach. So I'd just love to see, what's out there as far as projects in the works, or are there plans in place to kind of promote this as an option for people moving ahead?
Earlier, Pascal, I kind of cut you off a bit. What was the thought that you had when you were responding to the investment stuff?
Yeah, it had to do with, I think, a lot of how we develop programs, and MB Power is responsible for all energy efficiency programs. And the area that I work primarily on is climate change. So when we talk about energy efficiency, we're looking at greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And I remember reading the material there. We talked about stacking things. So when we talk about finances, if we have $1 to invest in your home, like an individual, it makes more sense to invest it in air leakage, in insulation, in sort of those things. And because those are the things that you're going to get the biggest return on investment in terms of reduction of energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions. So the solar energy is kind of the last thing, because it's the thing that is the most expensive tool to reduce our carbon footprint. So I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah.
That it's not. I think people who do want to install solar, they're doing it for other reasons than just pure greenhouse gas emissions reductions.
I would love to comment on that, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So as I've had my solar systems in place, I spent tens of thousands of dollars on solar systems in my home and my office. And yes, I'm a financial person, so I crunched the numbers a little bit, but I did it for like you say, for other reasons as well. And I'm not going to get any money from anybody in incentives. Buried way down beneath all of those energy efficiency. I get what you're saying. It's more cost efficient to do those things, and I'm glad there's incentives to do insulation and energy efficiency and et cetera. But buried way, way down beneath all that is, oh, by the way, we'll give you a little bit to your solar if you do these other things. And it's going to cost me thousands of dollars to do those things to get any incentives for solar. So I'm essentially not going to get anything. I don't know anyone who has gotten anything from that.
Yeah.
And I think it's, and I'm not associated with any political parties or anything. So I'm just going to say this, it's embarrassing that New Brunswick doesn't have much in the way of solar incentives. Trump's America has 26% of federal credit, I believe, not to mention state and municipal stuff. Other provinces have credits that you can get right off the bat. It's embarrassing in New Brunswick that we don't have simple incentives for solar. It makes so much sense.
Yeah, so the incentives are the dollars that we have, that MB Power has, that we're getting from the federal government. We're putting those where they have the biggest bang for the buck to reduce our carbon footprint. That's it. And I don't know what else to say.
But this is excellent though, because this is exactly the conversation. And then the next layer is, where's the breakthrough? Does the breakthrough happen at the household level? Does the breakthrough happen at a community level? Does it happen at a policy level from a provincial and federal agreement?
There's just one last point on making your house as efficient as possible. Then when you do go to install solar, it dictates the size of the solar that you need if you're heating your house with electricity. So it doesn't make sense to design a solar system from the get-go before you do all the other improvements. So that's the logic behind the energy efficiency programs we have in New Brunswick.
So we don't go into a house and look at their 12 months of bills and not look at anything else. We find that there's a huge advantage to getting rid of that 40-gallon or 60-gallon or hot water tank right off the bat. And then what we've seen is like on a 60-gallon hot water tank, a savings of $70 to $100 a month. You know, that's way off what the Energy Star shows it on the label, but that's the reality. So to replace that with something like a tankless or with a heat pump water heater, you see significant savings. So we do the real big one. Like hot water is a huge one. You can save, a 5 to a 7 kilowatt system just by getting rid of that electric water heater. And then that does drop the size of the system down. So you're getting efficiency that way. Maybe there's some baseboard heat. They might look at putting in like a mini split or a couple mini splits and then drop that consumption down significantly. So like one circuit of heat is about 3,300 watts or so. So two 18,000 BTU heat pumps is only 1,200 to 1,400 watts running. I know I monitor everything in my house. I have 3 of them. I have solar. I have a tankless. We had one year where our total yearly consumption was 6,200 kilowatt hours in that year. So it's very easy to get your bill down. It's just tackling the right things first. You don't see a huge amount of return in doing your windows because windows are very expensive. You don't see a huge amount in your block wall insulation because then you need excavators and to redo your whole foundation wall, which you're into $6,000-7,000. So these things that we like to tackle are the low-hanging fruit, the water, the heating, and then we look at doing solar after.
I'd like to add to that too, if I could. I've been part of plenty of PV array installs in my career, and I have never once put up solar panels on a house that had incandescent light bulbs in it. The first thing we do is change to LED, because you're absolutely correct, Pascal, that there are better decisions that we can make to save energy prior to building it. I find that people finally develop a respect for energy, though, when they make it themselves. So the act of creating that energy allows them to put value to what they're doing. So we need to start educating to the idea of conservation to begin with. Turn off the things that you're not using. Let's have an understanding of the impact of LED lights. And then I think we need to make really intelligent decisions with the things that we're going to invest in. When we start talking, we need to understand the life cycle of a product before we determine whether it's advisable for the environment to make this change or not. But what we should be doing is really looking at our new construction industry and moving towards policies and implementing strategies that create a better world for tomorrow. It makes no sense in my mind, and I could be wrong. I haven't truly looked at the numbers, but the concept of removing 4-year-old windows to install new windows, because now they're going to save me, some greenhouse gas emissions, doesn't make sense because I've now built 2 windows. The idea of scrapping my old Chevy today that's 3 years old in exchange for an electric vehicle to save the planet doesn't make sense. But when I'm building a new home, if I'm doing anything less than putting in the most efficient windows, then I'm doing something wrong. If I'm not considering the roof layout in order to install a PV array, I'm doing something wrong because we know better today.
Great. We've got about 15 minutes left. This is excellent. Thank you. This kind of conversation invites, it's either or. We tend to approach things either or, rather than where's the fit and what's the transition period and where are the first breakthroughs and then what are the policies and practices needed to be put in place to take us the rest of the way. So in 2040, we've rebuilt or reshifted our culture into another way of everyday life, basically. Along the way, we have to debunk some myths. So can we wander into some of the myths, like it's too cold in Canada to have solar arrays, whether they're community or industrial or household, or that it's nighttime and you're not getting any power, and all those things that you've all heard in different ways. Can we knock at some of those and see what happens?
So a lot of the myths that you hear is that it doesn't work in the wintertime because our climate's too cold. Where actually, the colder it is, the better they work. Another thing is people worry about hail. A lot of these solar panels are tested way beyond what the industry standard is with hail ball testing, 29 meters per second and a 2-inch hail ball. Chris can probably see some of those hail balls out in Calgary the past month.
Just saw them recently. A couple of weeks back, we had a pretty intense hailstorm up in the Northeast. I'm not sure if anyone heard about that, but apparently it's the most expensive natural disaster in our history. I had the opportunity to go out with an adjuster because they needed someone to sign off on the PV arrays. So I had the opportunity to look at 5 solar arrays up on roofs. Of those 5 solar arrays that I looked, 1 solar panel was damaged out of all of them. The vinyl siding in which we happily put up on the homes were exploded all over the place like a war zone. But the PV arrays were fine. 1 module out of the 5 arrays were broken.
All right. In snow?
No.
Mark?
Snow, Chris?
Yeah. So a good PV array designer is going to design that grid tie array with the inclusion concepts of snow saturation on top of the module. So I know that it's going to snow X amount of days in your area, just like I know it's going to be X amount of hours of sun. And so we have already deducted the production from that and built a grid-tied system with that concept of inclusion inside of it. So therefore, we're still good. We can get around that. In fact, if you're ever hearing a system where someone is saying, I can't do that, you are not talking to the right person. There are no limitations to what we can do. Solar is a very simple building block. If you need to do twice what 1 solar panel will do, you simply put up 2 solar panels. So there's no limitations to design elements.
Right. So a lot of the things people also talk about is that solar won't work because it's only going to function during the day. So the whole industry is changing over to solar plus storage. So the storage is batteries. So whether it be a lithium ion, a flooded lead acid, an AGM, or a flow battery. This storage component is really going to be a major important part when we start to get that grid, that distribution grid saturation around 20%. Once we start to see that, then we drop our main production on our centralized generation stations. And then what happens is in between 4 to maybe 6, 7 o'clock, we have all of our generation from our centralized units are down at low power. So they have to ramp up quickly. So the batteries play a main role in this to fill in that gap, and they can also be used for high peak demand periods of time. You can charge your batteries on and off peak. You can discharge them during peak times. So that's really, it's not just solar, it's solar plus the storage that's really going to be what's developing as we've been down in the States to the Solar Power International. The storage component is really being talked about a lot more because what it does is it eliminates the need to have spinning reserve to back up renewables. So one thing you don't want to do is have a bunch of windmills and solar panels and then have a oil-fired or a coal generator at Colson Cove or wherever spinning in case the wind stops blowing or in case the sun, in case you get a sudden cloud over top of a huge field mount array or something like that. So the batteries, they balance it out. They smooth out the curve, and then they can also increase charging on off-peak times. That way the utility can maintain more of the baseline load and not be ramping up and down these generators all the time. So they can play a key role in that.
And we should also start changing our concepts of what storage looks like. When we start talking about storage, we immediately see the resistance for some of the research that people have done who oppose these concepts and state that, lithium mines are this to the world, or, how are you going to dispose of that in the future? We need to start understanding that storage comes in a variety of ways. We can store energy itself as electrons through things like batteries, if we will, chemical solutions. But we do have cool technology that's coming to be. It's not only lithium or lead acid that exists now. We have saltwater batteries that are starting to make a resurgence, and they're very good at storing large amounts of energy for long periods of time. They're very environmentally safe. We start looking at other parts of the world that have done some cool stuff, and I've had the opportunity to work on forms of kinetic battery systems where we're storing water at altitudes, which we've used to pump up to a height, and now we can use that kinetic difference between the height and the distance it's going to spin a turbine as we release that energy. We start seeing cranes that lift up blocks, and the resistance in the falling portion can spin a turbine when we do that. So batteries can come in all forms and shapes and sizes. They do not need to be chemical, and they do not need to have an impact on the environment like we often look to. So when we start thinking outside the box, we get to some cool stuff. The myths that come along with this, I've heard everything in my career from solar panels are going to expedite the rate in which we suck energy from the sun, to the idea that wind turbines will slow the rotation of the planet because of the resistance. So we need to, start standardizing the knowledge we have with these things. And I can't tell whether these people were serious that were saying these things or not, but it is an idea that's out there that we have to detract from and defend in the renewable energy sector consistently. I think as we move forward, what we're going to see is small-scale microgrids become very popular. A lot of the projects that I'm working on internationally have to do with grid development. And we're starting to see an upswing in the investment in solar that's second to none. It's very similar to the adoption of the cell phone. When we look through places like India, they were one of the largest adopters of the new technology because they didn't have current infrastructure that they were bootstrapping new technology to. And so when we see developing nations, we're changing the way we're doing it. We're doing it with microgrids. Our transmission lines are DC as opposed to alternating current. We're inverting on site as required. So we can start seeing some new technology that's going to allow for the next swing in technology to take forward.
That's a really good point about the microgrids. That is the future from my perspective as well. The challenge that we're going to have is historically, we're moving from a centralized production facility and distribution lines to microgrids. So the transition period, that's we're just starting that, and it's not trivial. But I agree with you 100%.
We know that, Chris.
Different areas are going to require.
Mark, can we go to Mark? Chris, can we go to Mark?
I seen a comment there that I thought that we should address pretty quick about the just a grid tied system. So a straightforward grid tied system that is connected directly to MV power without batteries. If the power goes out, these inverters, they automatically stop producing power and sending power back to the grid underneath the fault. So if you do have one of the grid tied systems, if your power goes out from the utility, it's a requirement that they also go out. So you will not have power with a grid tied system. There are grid tied systems that do have battery backup also. The one that we're installing right now is an 8,000 watt grid tied inverter that can also be used off grid. In this case, with the inverter, if the power does go out, it automatically transfers to just the battery power, I think within 8 milliseconds, so you don't even notice it.
Chris?
I was just going to say that one of the challenges with adopting these things too is we have a world where we have access to so much information, and we oftentimes believe that a solution that works in one area can translate very easily to our area. That's not always the case. For example, in Calgary, the inclusion of microgrids is a little bit easier to adopt because we have large-scale residential swaths that are being developed very quickly. So the amount of buildings that we see that are new any year allows us the opportunity to change the way that we do it. So a solution that's Calgary-based may not translate very well to a New Brunswick area. So we have to look at localized solutions based on considerations to our area. And then the populace of that area needs to respect and appreciate the work that the governments have done to introduce localized solutions. So we need to not say, well, Calgary did this, so therefore New Brunswick can do this, or New Brunswick did that, so therefore PEI can do this. It's not all the same.
Greg, does that also apply to investment strategies and household financial management?
Well, I might not get the chance to say this again, so I just want to say that I am very much in favor of energy efficiency, and I believe you when you say that it is better use of money to reduce our energy use. But that's like saying we're going to stop you from doing something good. We're not going to incentivize something good because there's something better. And you already have a certain amount of adoption to reduce cost efficiency or energy efficiency. And you're not getting any extra adoption of that. And I just feel that some money put towards incentives. This is very silly, but if I said we're not going to incentivize electric cars because you're eating too much meat and meat hurts the environment, how silly. But I mean, to say that there's something better, so therefore we're not going to help you with that, just doesn't make sense. I feel that we're hiding behind cost efficiency or energy efficiency. That's our reason for not helping solar, and almost every other state, province, country incentivizes it. Do we have it right and everyone else has it wrong?
But maybe it's just pieces in a puzzle in a certain window of time. That's all. We might be in a certain window of time. We're at the threshold of a shift and some of that new thinking. That's why I introduced Buckminster Fuller's quote, because we need to start building a new model. So it's going to be a bit of a dance for a while for where the limits are for some strategies and perspectives and where the new ones are. Pascal, did you want to respond? And then I'll bop to Chris, and then we've got about 2 minutes after that.
Yeah, I don't really have a response.
Well,
we are like in the next 5 years, we'll see a huge shift in solar adoption. I'm convinced of that. And it is really related to the price, you know, the payback, and it's financial. Once that goes away, and what they're saying is in 2025 that in New Brunswick, that crossover point will happen, and then we'll get widespread adoption of solar.
Okay. Is it also an element of control? MB Power has been the prime thing. Is there a control issue underneath that quickly?
Well, I don't think so. But tied to that is we have assets that the problem, you know, everybody in New Brunswick owns those assets, and if we don't use those assets, we're liable to pay them off. So the more renewables that we use, that sort of personal renewables that we're not using all that infrastructure that everybody owns, the more that people are still using that are left on those infrastructures, their rates are going to go up. So it's a really complicated issue.
Yeah, and that's good because that's the space we have to wander into. Chris?
I was just going to say that the way that this works usually is we see the interest for the technology that comes to be. That started existing somewhere in the early 2000s, believe it or not. Some of the first PV arrays I installed, I was buying modules for about $13 a watt, which is very, very different than where we're at today. We then see the incentivization that comes, and then we see standards move to the fact that it's now mandatory through some areas. So if you look at how California's grown, they've gone from interest to incentivization to mandate. No longer can you just build homes without green technology inclusive. So I hope that some point in time we'll get there.
Yeah, that's part of the new model. So we've got roughly 2 minutes left. I would like to go around with everyone, give you 10 or 15 seconds each for final thoughts. And if we could start with Andrew, that would be great.
Yeah, no, that's great. I just found the whole conversation very, very informative. I think government has a major role to play in this to push the envelope, not to throw a whole bunch of money all the time, but through regulation, through policy, through incentives. And as I know Mark quite well and Megan, and thank them for everything they do in this industry in New Brunswick. But there's other people involved. I think it just needs a little push, and hopefully, in some point down the road, future governments in New Brunswick will provide that push, because nothing gets done by itself. Nothing gets moved unless I believe in this sense the government has a major role to play to be there for people and to be there to do the right thing for the people, but also for the environment. So thank you it's very informative, taking a lot of notes, and I wish you all the best. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Jenica, about 15, 20 seconds.
Sure, and I echo absolutely. I think government has a major role to play, and it's about empowering and getting out of citizens' ways to wanting to do this, and incentivizing is certainly there. Removing those restrictions, dealing with our utility that's had its heyday for quite a long time. I think it's far past time that we have these conversations. So I'm just so thankful that this is happening. And I'm a Green MP, but that doesn't mean I'm an expert by any means in all of this. So this has been incredibly informative. And it really helps me be a better advocate and help any way that I can. And this has been incredibly enlightening. So just thank you so much for bringing your expertise today.
Great. Pascal?
Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to participate here. And I am very interested in solar personally. And I can honestly say that the discussions that I have with MB Power, that they are trying to figure out how to make all this work. So they've got this, a relic of a system that we've built from the past, whenever MB Power started, and they're scratching their heads and they're looking around the world and they're saying, how are we going to integrate what we have now with what the future is going to look like? And like I can honestly say, that is a very serious topic of discussion at MB Power.
New model. Greg?
Wow, 15 seconds, that's not very much. So Winston Churchill said about the Americans, I believe, he said, you can always count on the Americans to do the right thing after they've exhausted all other options. And I think that can be applied to us as well. And I think finally, one day, yes, we will eventually do solar and we will eventually do these right things. But to have to be dragged there and to wait till there's no other choice, or to wait until the payback is just enough to make it okay, we should be incentivizing this and not waiting 5 years. And to say that we have old assets that need to be paid for, it's going to cost something. Yes, it's going to cost something, or it may cost something, but isn't that okay? Like, aren't some things worth paying a bit for?
Okay, Chris?
I appreciate the time to be here with everyone. I just want to point out in conclusion that I think that the best way to start this is through education. I'm biased because I do work in the world of education, but it was by choice. I understood this was the first step of moving to where we need to be. And so when people start understanding the technology and they stop just simply catering to the memes that they might see on social media and actually do some investigating and give this technology the respect that it deserves, they'll come to understand that it is green, it is forward thinking, and it is long lasting. There is good investment opportunities here. So just do your own research, understand the technology, and speak to professionals, and you'll find that there's a lot that's eye-opening through this industry.
Great. And Mark?
I guess one thing that I would add, everybody, thank you very much for coming on. We really do appreciate it. And I guess some of the stuff that we've seen online with whether it be like a federal tax incentive program, like there's a tax clause right now that exists up until 2023. So we're about 3 years from seeing the beginning of the curtailment of that program. So there is a tax clause where commercial operating businesses can get a 100% accelerated capital depreciation clause is what it is. I think it's a 43.2. There's not enough information out there. It's not really talked about that much, but some of the bigger commercial projects that we're working on right now, that's a big thing for them to get a 100% write down year one with no half year rule. So that it's kind of neat to see that there is some of that stuff that is available, but I think a lot of the time you really have to search for this stuff, as Chris would know. Like, you have to find this somehow, and it's not talked about very much, and it's really difficult for people to get this program up and going, or find the information that they need to get that. But I think solar with battery technology and having distributed energy is going to be the way that we go, because as MB Power has more deteriorating assets like the dam or plants like that, they're always going to need maintenance. And I do believe that they finance these out over typically the same period of time as a solar 25-year, 30-year asset. So why not invest in something that's different today, that does work, that is proven to work, and move forward with it, and just update the grid a little bit.
Great, thanks for that. And thanks for everyone for watching and contributing. Fascinating conversation, and it's a real live example, very authentic, as to where we are in this point in time. There's parts of a vision about where we need to go, and we're building a province for 2040. And so thanks everyone who participated, the panelists, the host, and all of the viewers. And this will be up online, and now I'll pass it over to Susan.
I just wanted to, on behalf of the Coalition for Responsible Energy in New Brunswick, just once again echo what Dennis said, to thank everyone. This was the first webinar that we've done for our new coalition, and we're very pleased with how it went. We're certainly now incentivized to do more, so do watch for that. You can put your name on our mailing list to make sure that you're kept up to date on everything we're doing. If you go to our website, crednb.ca, you'll see an option there to sign up to be an advocate, a champion of responsible energy development. So thank you again, and we'll see you next time, hopefully. Bye now. This video was published by the Coalition for Responsible Energy Development in New Brunswick, crednb.ca.